just double check and confirm that it's just about to be clicked on. It has, and this video will be available in the next couple of working days on our YouTube channel, and by request we will be able to send that over to you as well. So yeah, thank you, and hope you enjoyed today's event. Yeah, just a little bit about Transparency if you don't know about us before. We are a Microsoft only cloud partner, i.e. we are Microsoft's most accredited pure play partner in the UK. If you hadn't been aware, Microsoft are transitioning away from the gold competencies and moving towards what they call solution designations. I think they realized about 12, 16-ish months ago that they handed gold competencies out like candies to kids, really. They're a bit too easy to obtain. You know, you just pay your $5 or so grand and you got the gold sticker, where actually the solution designations are a lot more of a intensive examination, really, a bit like if you was going to go through an ISO certification. So Microsoft go through previous work, talk to customers, understand what IP you guys have actually developed yourself to be able to deliver a great service and a great bunch of consultancy to clients. And we're really proud that we, on day one, that Microsoft were able to launch this, that we were able to hold all 6. So the 6 pillars, I guess, as you can probably read yourselves, but it's security, modern work, digital app and innovation, data and AI, Azure, and then also business applications, with a number of advanced specialisms underneath. And actually, one of my favorite ones that we hold on top of the solution designations for Microsoft is the Microsoft Intelligent Security Association badge as well, which is a round table of select security partners that work very closely with Microsoft to help drive the security strategy and the product set that Microsoft are able to deliver to clients and end users like yourselves. Next slide, please. So just a bit about the agenda. I'll pass over to Terence as he's put this together.
That's fine. Thank you, Adam. Thank you for that introduction. Adam and some other colleagues are going to be on the call to monitor the chat. So they'll answer the questions where possible. And if there's any unanswered questions, we'll deal with them in the Q&A at the end. So today's agenda, we're going to talk about this idea of ROT, which is actually an acronym. So I'll explain what that means. We'll talk about how it's going to possibly affect Copilot over and above how it's probably already affecting your organization, and then what we can do about it. So ROT is, as I said before, an acronym that stands for, firstly, redundant. So this is information which is redundant, and we can see, for example, it will be in cases where you've uploaded a file from a local device or from an on-premises server, uploaded into the cloud, but you haven't tidied up after that upload. So you've now got 2 versions of the file at least. It could also be draft versions. So I'm sure we've all seen these really funky file names. Customer X migration proposal 1.1 draft, brackets, Terence revisions, brackets, final, dash, no, really final, version 2. And these kind of files really clog up our systems and are not good for us, as we'll see for reasons I'll cover in a sec. We also have obsolete. Now, I have seen a few resources online which substitute the O for outdated. And certainly outdated files are problematic, but it's a bit more subtle than that. So when you talk about outdated, a lot of people just think, oh, right, how old is the file? And there will be some circumstances where files need to be retained for long periods of time. So it could be due to regulation, financials, for example, 7 years for most companies. and with some of the customers we deal with in government or in defense. For example, if you've got schematics for a submarine, for example, these things need to be retained for 50 years plus. After, and even when countries, for example, will sell this equipment onto other countries, then you need to keep these schematics while the product's still in service. So it's not just outdated, it is things which aren't really relevant anymore. So I gave there as an example, Windows 2000 server hardening guide, VMware money saving tips. These are all things which are no longer relevant to your business potentially. And then finally, trivial data. So this is data which was important at the time, but it served its purpose. You don't really need it anymore. And we can have an example there of maybe meeting minutes from January 2016. Well, I think I maybe made that date a little bit longer than it needed to be. It's a little typo there. But yeah, this is stuff which really has no need to keep, and we should get rid of it. Well, why? Why should we get rid of it? Rot has consequences. So most simplistically, we're just talking about wasted space. And as the cloud storage utilization continues to grow, Microsoft talks about terabytes per hour. I'm not really sure how realistic that is, but certainly we're uploading and editing, which creates versions. So I guess if you take all of that into account, that's not an unreasonable figure. So this is storage space which will eventually, you'll hit quotas, you'll hit buffers, and then you'll have to either spend on more storage or you'll have to look at tidying up. We're also talking about frustration on the user side. We're just wasting time scrolling through long lists of potentially ambiguous search results trying to find information we're looking for. If you talk to any kind of compliance or quality officers, this is a bane of their lives. We make e-discovery more difficult. We help customers all the time who have sort of GDPR data requests, and when you're running these searches and coming back with terabytes and terabytes of information which arguably isn't needed, and that makes complying with these kind of requests very difficult. And you have a sort of a meta risk overall of making potentially bad business decisions based on bad data. Now, all of this, you might be looking at the slide and thinking, well, hang on, when is he going to mention Copilot? Well, I'll talk about Copilot now, because Copilot for Microsoft 365 will base the answers to the queries that you give it on the information that's contained in your tenant. This is one of the main value propositions of this suite of products. But that then puts us at risk of the garbage in, garbage out principle. If you have old, redundant, obsolete, or trivial data, that is going to factor into what Copilot gives you back. And that then aggravates all of the problems that we've already got up on the slide. So I'm just going to pause for a second there and give Adam a chance to launch a poll. The link for the poll will go in the meeting chat. And I'm just interested, based on, now that we've defined what rot is, how much of a problem do you feel it is for your organization? So please vote in the poll. I see we're tracking past 10, 11, 12, 13 responses now. So folks are engaging with the poll, which is very good. I'm going to do my own vote and submit that, and then we'll have a look at the responses. I think we might need to wait for the poll to close before I can view the responses. So just give that another few seconds. I think we're probably topping out now at 31. And my Teams is not showing me the results. So I'm just going to switch into...
It's coming, Terence. It's coming.
Teams chat. Am I just being a bit impatient?
It is, yeah.
Okay. Let's wait for that result to load. And there we go. So quite encouraging that there's actually no one on the call who's so naive or inexperienced that they are not concerned at all. I would have very much loved to talk to anybody who did say 0% because in the unlikely event that they'd actually solved this problem, that I would really like to know what they've been doing. So a lot of us, it's an even split really, 50% saying they're slightly worried, and the rest of those respondents are saying that they're actually quite concerned. So let's just look at an example of this Copilot hallucination. So I went on to the Copilot chat bot. This is the one that you get at copilot.microsoft.com. And it's the one that gives you the ability to specify whether you want to pull information online, so from effectively Bing search on steroids, or whether you want an internal search. I switched it over to showing me work information only, and I asked it, how long is SharePoint design training? So we run courses for folks who want to learn how to design not only intranets, so sort of cosmetic page design, but also information architecture, structural design. And arguably, I wasn't specific enough with my prompt, but this is a kind of prompt that you could reasonably expect someone to use. And it actually picked up on a fake file. Well, it's a real file, but it was deliberately misleading. So I planted a file there, which is a course outline for SharePoint Designer. And it picked up on that and said, oh, you've got a half-day SharePoint Designer course. Now, those of us who've worked with SharePoint since records began will remember SharePoint Designer, some of us fondly, some maybe not so much. But you probably also know that Microsoft have actually blocked the ability for SharePoint Designer to be used in SharePoint Online because the product is deprecated. The kind of workflows that you would have built with SharePoint Designer have been replaced with Power Automate, and it's not something we should really be talking about anymore. But that is an example of how Copilot has quote unquote hallucinated. I actually don't blame Copilot at all, because it's perfectly reasonable for Copilot to look at the data I've got access to. So it looks at my OneDrive, looks at my Teams messages, looks at my email, looks at the SharePoint sites, of course, SharePoint, Teams as well that I'm a member of, looks at Viva Engage. It looks pretty much at everything I've got access to. And it saw that there is this new and therefore potentially interesting document and gave me the answer. And the problem is that file really shouldn't have been there at all. So how can we get rid of this information that is causing Copilot to do what we don't want it to do? So the first thing we've got to really think about is what our approach is going to be, and we've got to ask ourselves a question. How mature is our understanding of our data and data management principles? So if I had to sort of pop around your office or join one of your virtual meetings and ask people, are you a data owner? Do you know who the data owner is for your team or your department? Do you know the difference between a data owner and a data steward? Have you ever heard of a data custodian? And if these questions are all met with blank stares, That's not so good. That's not really what we want to hear. Also, if we're going to talk to you about your data classification, so do you know how to classify data? Do you know what your responsibilities as an employee are in relation to how you handle your company's data? So if these are kind of questions that are answered starting with then we need to put some work and some thought into this. And there are generally two approaches you can take. One is keep everything and delete what you don't need. And of course, what does everyone do? We keep everything. Why? Just in case. Now, I'm being a little bit frivolous. Of course, there are many good regulatory reasons, contractual reasons why you need to keep data. But in my experience of talking to quote unquote end users over all the time I've been working with this kind of stuff, a lot of people do not have clarity on what they should keep and what is safe to get rid of. And so just in case, we keep everything. Now that approach is not really sustainable because it means we just keep documents indefinitely and we have those problems that I discussed in one of the previous slides. It also arguably isn't really fair because it puts all the responsibility and burden on end users. So the other approach, which is to keep what you do need, but get rid of everything else, although it sounds similar, it is actually fundamentally different. That we are now going to say we work on an assumption that data will be flushed out of the system unless we do something to keep it. So it is, in a sense, more easy to formalize and implement. I should have maybe changed the word on the slide there to straightforward. I believe it's easier. Not everyone necessarily agrees, but it certainly is how the Microsoft tooling is designed to operate. And that brings a new kind of risk and reward calculation because, yes, you will be moving towards a situation where data is going to be deleted unless you specify otherwise. But in a sense, that's a good thing because it concentrates minds. It lets us work with IT to set up policies and procedures and labeling that will help us keep our systems clean. So practically speaking, what does that look like? So I want to really contextualize this in one of three levels of maturity. So level 100 is where arguably a lot of organizations find themselves. There's no information classification or governance strategy formalized. You maybe get little pockets of good practice, and that tends to be folks who've joined the organization coming from other companies where this kind of thing was maybe more formalized, and it's really almost by accident or by happy coincidence that they're doing anything to try and keep their data clean. So very reactive, very manual. And when we break it down into the kinds of places that Copilot is going to look for the source data for answering prompts, we find that when we're in email, people will, if you're lucky, delete the messages that they no longer need. You might have some kind of archiving folder available and they're dragging and dropping email into those folders. But there's no automatic deletion of any email content. When you look at Teams meetings, we have from Microsoft the default setting that says Teams recordings expire after 60 days. So that's better than nothing, I suppose. With documents, we are manually deleting stuff that we know we don't need. With OneDrive, maybe we are deleting the source documents after we've uploaded them. So I might be drafting something in my OneDrive, and then when it's ready to share with the team, I upload the file, and I really should remember to go back and delete the original because I don't need it anymore. It is now running from that copy in Teams or in SharePoint. And actually, the teams in the SharePoint sites themselves can contribute to ROT because we set up a team to run a project, and then at the end of that project, what happens to that team? Does it just get left behind? Is it archived? Is it put through some kind of process? At this level of maturity, we're probably doing nothing. Now, I'm not suggesting that all of these will be true. You in your organization may be doing some of these things. You may be doing some of them a bit better. So then arguably your maturity level will go up from just being a 100, which is kind of really the baseline where you're not doing anything. If you are, for example, you've implemented a workflow by which you get rid of teams 6 months after they were created. You go through a review process, and then maybe you archive them if they're dormant. Then give yourself a few more points. So maybe you'll be on a level 150 or a level 130. We're not going to do the math. Don't worry about it. The next level of maturity is where you have at least started formalizing some kind of organization-wide exercise to create a data lifecycle, and you begin to manage that. And a really important part of that is information classification, because once you start classifying information, you can begin creating labels that correspond with the classifications that you've created. So as a very basic starting point, you could have a classification that says delete everything after X number of years. So let's say maybe 2 years. Now, there might be some of you on the other side of the screen thinking, oh my goodness, you can't just delete everything after 2 years. What I'm suggesting is if you imagine like a pyramid, and at the bottom of the pyramid, you have a baseline policy that says, unless we specify otherwise, we get rid of it after 2 years. The next level up on that pyramid is where we start defining more specific policies. So then we can have a policy that says keep for 7 years if it's financial, keep for 50 years if it's a submarine weapon system specification, keep for 3 months if it is a contractor CV. But you begin creating these additional labels based on your information classification exercise, which you can at least start on a departmental basis, but you then roll out to the rest of the business once you've at least piloted it and you see that this works. So we can have this pyramid where the baseline says, if you don't tell me otherwise, I'm going to dump the stuff after 2 years, 3 years, however long. And then we start layering that with more specific policies or labels that we use to classify this information. And how that's done practically is to then look at the different places where information is stored, like emails, like Teams chat, and then make the labels available to people. Now, I don't want to get into the technicalities of this too much because we don't have huge amounts of time, but the idea is that you can link this retention behavior with a defined folder inside of Exchange. So in your inbox, for example, We could say the email expires automatically unless you tag the email with a different label, or move it into a folder. So you can have the inbox folder that says expire after a certain amount of time, and then we can have subfolders inside of that inbox where you drag and drop a message, or whether you create rules that says move the message to the folder if it contains a certain keyword or if it's from a certain customer. And then on those subfolders, provided everybody in the company's got the same subfolders, or not the company necessarily, but everybody in the same department or team has got the same subfolders, and then we can have those subfolders protected with different labels. So we will keep the stuff that we need to. With Teams chat, it's a bit more of a blunt instrument. That's just an expiry policy that says Teams chat expires after a certain amount of time. So this will both protect you from returning outdated information into a Copilot inquiry, as well as reminding users that Teams chat is really designed by Microsoft to be an expendable communication location, and we shouldn't be doing serious business there. With OneDrive, we can either have a blanket policy, everything in OneDrive expires after a certain amount of time, or we can do targeted policies. So maybe for everyone except executives, or everyone except folks who work with particularly, I'm really trying to think of a business reason why you would use OneDrive. I'm not a huge OneDrive fan from that point of view. I'm more about Teams and SharePoint, but we can have exceptions if we need them. That's really the point. And then when it comes to actual SharePoint sites and Teams, now remember, or in case you didn't know, there's a link between SharePoint and Teams, in the sense that when you create a team in Microsoft Teams, you automatically get a SharePoint site that sits behind that team, which is the storage for all the documents that you save in Teams. So one of the ways that we can prevent Copilot from finding rot and returning that in its prompt responses is to actually use something called restricted SharePoint search. So this is where you turn it on, and it then does a blanket setting that disables search. Okay, so it is quite a dramatic intervention, but what you're doing is, because you're blocking search, you are effectively also blocking Copilot from being able to find anything in SharePoint. Now, there are two exceptions to this. The first one is the user's OneDrive and anything that's been directly shared with them from other people's OneDrives. So all of the OneDrive stuff, Copilot can still use, and any SharePoint site that happens to be on your recently accessed, sorry, not recently, frequently. So there's that Microsoft graph monitoring that it is aware of which SharePoint sites you access frequently. So frequently accessed SharePoint and OneDrive is safe, but everything else is blocked. So you then have the opportunity to create some curated SharePoint sites that you then put on the allow list and restricted SharePoint search. So we just try that again after a drink. The restricted SharePoint search will allow those results to be picked up by Copilot. So, like I said, it's a bit of a dramatic intervention, but for organizations which have a higher risk of rot information, and also it's a security tool as well. So if you're particularly worried about Copilot finding stuff in your secured areas, then that restricted SharePoint search could be useful as well. Now, we will have a separate webinar. It's running in May, where we are going to talk about securing your environment for Copilot. There's a lot of other stuff we need to talk about there, so it's two separate webinars. But in this case, the security tool helps us with ROT as well. We can also start using purview labels. So for a lot of companies, E3 is quite a high licensing level, but if you are on an E3 license, you can have purview labels and policies which will link to SharePoint sites and Teams. So these policies will say, effectively, if you save anything into this particular team, then it gets a retention policy, which will then override that 7-year, that 2 or 3 year deletes everything. That's the baseline policy. By putting it in a particular team, you then override that with a policy that lets you keep it for longer. So there's definitely an opportunity to implement those kind of policies at that stage, as well as looking at a life cycle policy for the overall SharePoint site or team site. And let's not forget, if you are using Viva Engage, when you set up a new Viva Engage community, that also gets a SharePoint site. So we need to think about data that is potentially being returned from those areas too, and apply policies to them. So that's your kind of level 200. It is a mixture of some policies which we're applying to containers, and the containers therefore protect the documents automatically. It's some out-of-the-box settings in Teams that we can do, but there's still the ability for the users to put in some manual effort to label stuff. Level 300 is where we are maximizing our investment with more advanced versions of Purview and the E5 licenses, and that opens up a world of automation. So again, just conscious of time, I don't want to get into this in too much detail, but there is a cost-benefit equation that you need to do here. When you're thinking about the amount of time that people potentially will spend on manually labeling content to make sure that the default policy doesn't end up removing it, versus using those E5 licensed features where you have some, I won't call it AI because it's not quite a smart Copilot, but there's some intelligence that you get from creating policies that either use sensitive info types, so it knows what an NHS number looks like, it knows what a credit card number looks like, it knows what a national insurance number looks like. You can train it to recognize what your customer numbers look like, what your deal numbers, or any kind of consistent formatted piece of information. You can teach it to recognize through trainable classifiers, or you can just use keywords. So if it has a certain keyword or a key phrase in it, then this can automatically apply a retention label that stops the stuff from being deleted because you know you need to keep it. There's a lot of other cool stuff that gets unlocked as well with these more advanced licensing levels. So the ability to assign labeling not just to an overall SharePoint site, but actually to document libraries within that SharePoint site. We get a better e-discovery, and you might be wondering, how does e-discovery help me with this? But if you are, for example, doing a Copilot query, like the one I showed you earlier on, and you're getting back results, let's say, for example, that you used to, thinking about our, sorry, not transparency, but in my previous role, where the company I worked for had been acquired by another company, but like 6 or 7 years ago. So where we're getting documents that come back that refer to the old trading name, we could run an advanced e-discovery that says, go and find me all the documents that contain this keyword and then do something with them. So that's where we would bring those kind of tools to bear. It also makes it easier to add archiving. So if you think back to the slide I said earlier, where I basically said you've got two choices. We either keep everything just in case, and we tactically delete stuff when we find it creates problems or we run out of space. And then the other method, which is more supported by the tooling, which is keep only what you need and delete everything else. We understand user psychology enough to know that people will then still be in that mentality of, oh, I've got to try keep everything just in case. So I'm going to label stuff with a label that says keep it, which is arguably not really what we're trying to do. So when we're able to add archiving to the mix, then we give people that security blanket of it's not gone, but I'm just archiving it into somewhere that isn't covered by SharePoint search. And so now it's not going to show up in Copilot. So those are kind of our higher level strategies that you can consider if you are able to invest in those technology levels, but we should really be looking at least level 200. So that brings me to the end of the formal presentations.
Sarah,
Adam,
can you just flick back to the final slide, please?
Yeah, sure.
I just wanted to add a bit of clarification that Purview is actually available for a lot of people with E3 licensing. There's just not the automated piece. And actually, yes. Purview, you don't need the full license. There is an E5 security bolt-on E5 compliance bolt-on, sorry, if you have E3 licensing. What benefit that gives you is actually a lot of the automation behind Purview and around the sensitive info types, where the AI will work out itself from the sensitive info type. So you mentioned there, Terence, around credit card numbers, national insurance numbers, etc., etc. It will go and identify that itself. With the E3 version, it is very much you have to input a lot of documentation yourself into the engine, and after that, it will then start to recognize each of them sensitive info types within your documentation, which you can then further go on and label, etc. But if Purview was something that people are more interested in and wanted to find out more, then we are more than happy to answer any questions that you have on that on a separate note as well.
Yeah, thanks for that clarification. Yeah, it is the main distinction between the level 200 and level 300 is the automation in going through that stuff. I'm just catching up with the questions in the chat, so we've got a few minutes to go through those. First one's from Phil. Is there a level before 100 around how to sort a shared network drive which no one has ownership? Wow, that's a really tough one there. Before I answer that, just to let you know that there is another poll that's gone in. So if you're interested in any of our assessment workshops, please fill in all that apply, and we will get back to you about how we can engage on those. So Phil, with your first question there, that's a pretty tough ask. Now I see that Adam has replied to that, so I'm just going to have a look at what he said there, that there is an SPO, a SharePoint Online migration tool. So yeah, the migration tool is actually going to help you with the analysis up to a point. The problem that you identified or that you listed there is that there's no ownership. And that's really, really tough, because what we would advise customers to do in that case is to start appointing. If you start with volunteers and then move to voluntold, but you can't have data without owners. So the owners need to be appointed, because if you don't, what you end up with is we're just going to lift and shift the stuff into the cloud, and then things aren't going to go that well. So we've got a few strategies that we use there, but yes, we do get the initial report from the migration tool, and then we work with customers, because as you say, we some of these structures where we're seeing like 15 folders deep, it's just bonkers to try do it all manually. So there's a balance there. Let's have a chat about that outside of this call. If you're interested, you can ping me directly on my email, or you can ping one of the folks in chat. Will follow up with you there. Next question from Larry. This seems ideal when starting fresh, but I've got 1.3 terabytes of data. This might sound like I'm not taking your question very seriously, but in all honesty, I've learned to not be too hung up on the actual amount of terabytes. There's potentially a lot of duplication. There's a lot of stuff that is just beyond a certain age, and there's going to be large file types. And when you start analyzing the data and you start taking some of those individual things out of the equation, it becomes more manageable. So it's not that I don't take the question seriously, but I would be more interested in doing an analysis either with a migration tool or something like tree size, and start slicing and dicing that before I make any more firm recommendations on that.
I think
we've got a few.
To add on that for Larry, it kind of depends on what your idea of the data strategy would be behind that 1.3 terabytes of data. You know, is it everything from accounting information, HR information, all the way through to client information? Because each step of that will have a different type of compliance that you and your business would need to apply to that. So really, it's about starting there and taking each chunk at a time, and then understanding what you want to do with it, and then looking at the tooling that we've mentioned here today around kind of the Purview suites with either E3, E5, or even just before that, what kind of policies you would like to apply within things like Teams, etc., to kind of cut that rot away. Because I'm pretty sure that 1.3 terabytes, there will be quite a lot of duplication in there without you even realizing it. So it's more about the strategy rather than the size of data. But again, myself and the team that are on the call here, or even the wider team outside of this call, it would certainly be something that we're more than happy to have a discussion with you at the very least and try and point you in the right direction.
Thanks, Adam. So just very quick shameless plug. We've got some workshops that we can run for you. A few of those are mentioned in the poll about follow-up conversations. Just in conclusion, I would say that I hope that the problem statement here hasn't been too depressing. Microsoft looks at Copilot readiness from two aspects. One they call Copilot Ready, and that's quite a low technical bar to entry. So, fill in the checkbox and ask us to talk to you about one of those Copilot readiness workshops. Copilot Optimized is a bit more complex to achieve, but certainly possible. And we can talk to you about what that looks like as well. So wrapping up, thank you, everyone. Apologies, we're a few minutes over time, but really appreciate your attendance. It's been great having you on the call. And I look forward to seeing you for the security one in May. Keep an eye peeled on LinkedIn. Look for the registration link. We'll see you then. Thank you and goodbye.